It's 7:14 now. Manish and Johan,
Yeah,
can
let's
you start?
start. Yes.
Okay, sure. Can you all see my screen? But if you can, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, hello everyone. Yeah, thanks for joining the last meetup for this year. So this is a special event jointly organized by the Singapore User Group and the Singapore Developer Group. Yep. And once again, sorry for the delay due to the technical issues. Okay, let's kick off with the agenda for today. Okay, so we have Joanne and myself, the co-leader for the Singapore User Group. And then today we also have Manish and Sivakumar, the co-leader for the Singapore Developer Group. And these are the community groups that we have in Singapore. We have in total 7 groups. So the event for today is organized by the user group and the developer group. And if you want to find out more about the community groups, you can access to this URL. Okay, the agenda for today, we have we done the kickoff, and then we'll have a presentation about flow. It will be an interesting topic. So I think initially we were planning to have like a breakout sessions to, I mean, for all of us to talk to each other, but I think it's not possible with Google Meet, right? Manish, do we have this feature in Google Meet?
No.
No. Oh, okay. Unfortunately, so we cannot do a breakout room. So I think let's proceed with the presentation. So so yeah, we can't do the breakout room. Sorry about that. And yeah, today we have a speaker, yeah, all the way from Norway, Melody Loh. So she's the founder of the website Salesforce Flowsum.com, and she's 10. She has 10 Salesforce certifications, and she's an application architect. So she's working as a consultant at Wipro. Okay, Melody, are you ready for the presentation?
Yes, I am.
Okay, thank you, Melody. So over to you now.
Yes. All right, then
Okay.
I will share my screen now.
Thank you.
No problem. Share now. All right, can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Yeah, and everybody can hear me well, I assume.
Yes.
Yes.
Lot and
Very
Yes.
good.
Yes. All right. Oh, sorry. There's some notification there. All right. So thanks, Jason, for introducing me. And then it's my pleasure to present at the Salesforce Singapore User Group. And so thanks, Johan and Manish, for inviting me as well. And before we start, I would just like to give you a little bit more insight about me. So I have been in the Salesforce ecosystem for about 2.5 years right now. And I started with Flow about half years into my Salesforce career. So I had experience with Flow about 2 years for now. And during my Flow learning journey, what I realized is that it's really hard for me to find the resources that I need. Whenever I need to learn some concepts, I need to like Google so much. I have to go like from sites to sites. There's never a place that have everything I need to know explained in a very easy English. So that's why I decided to start Salesforce Flowsum, because I wanted to have a place that I can collect all the information that you will need in your flow learning journey. And during my experience of helping the community, I have helped with more than 130 cases and have built more than 200 flows. And I kind of collect all the important insights from my experience, and I want to share them with you. So I hope you will find the session today helpful. And again, today, the target audience is for someone that either have basic information about flow or you haven't started with flow at all. So it will be a beginner-friendly session. So if that's clear, I would just show you the agenda of today. First, we are going to go into some introduction about flow. And then the second part, the starter pack, I will talk about some important concepts when it comes to flow. But please note that, we only have 75 minutes today, and then there's so many things to talk about when it comes to flow. So the goal today is not to teach you everything about flow. Rather, I want to give you some pointers of what you would need in your flow learning journey. So after today's session, you can just follow these pointers and then pick up those concepts at your own pace. And at the end, I will show you some advice from my experience of how to advance in flow together with some good resources. So if that's all clear, let's get started. The first part will be the flow introduction. And then, of course, the first question we have to ask is, what is flow really? So when it comes to Salesforce automation, there are two most important factors. The first one is the complexity, meaning how difficult it is to use and to learn that tool. And the second one is the flexibility, meaning what you can achieve with that tool, how many different solutions you can make with that tool. And then if we put all the Salesforce automation tool on this plan, they can actually follow the same path. So they follow like a straight line. So that means that the Salesforce automation tool, their complexity and flexibility are proportional. The easier it is to use, the more limited it will become. But the more difficult it is to use, the more flexible it can be. So followed by that principle, we have workflow, rules, process builder, flow, and then Apex. But then there's also another consideration to this. If we draw a line between flow and Apex, on the left side, this is what we call the declarative tool. And then on the right side, this is the programmatic tool. So the difference is that the declarative tool, you only need to focus on the logic building. So you have the building blocks and you just need to construct your logic using that tools. It's kind of like building Legos. But the programmatic tool, you basically have to hard code everything. If you need any function or methods, either it has to be an existing class or you have to hard code it. Basically, you just code. So from this graph, we can conclude that flow is actually the most complicated, yet the most flexible declarative automation tool in the Salesforce automation domain. So now it's clear of like where flow sits. What's really important when it comes to automation is you always have to think about how complicated your problem is. So based on the complexity of your problem, you would choose the different level of the automation tool. So that's just a really important understanding to Salesforce automation. So when it's clear what flow is, the next question people might wonder is, why flow then? Why do we have to go with flow? Well, first, we can compare it to the declarative tools. It has several benefits. The first one is, of course, it's more flexible. That's what I mentioned just in the previous slides. When I just started with Flow, I was really surprised how many different solutions you can build with Flow. And I could never imagine that when I was using Workflow and Process Builder. So Flow is a lot more flexible than the previous two automation tools. And the second one is it's actually surprisingly easier to debug than other workflow and process builders. The reason is when we were using workflow and process builders, what we need to do is we just need to activate them and then test in the actual interface. But you see, that requires a lot of back and forth. But in Flow, you have that built-in debug mode or debug mode you can use. So you can just debug right inside Flow without jumping back and forth. So that's actually a great benefit when it comes to Flow compared to other declarative tools. And then, of course, when we compare to the programmatic tool, there's also several benefits. The first one is it's easier to learn. That's for sure. Like you don't have to be a developer to learn Flow. And the second one is it's going to be quicker to develop. So when I was using Apex, the thing that I suffered the most is actually writing the test class. I feel a bit embarrassed saying that, but I have no problem writing the actual class. But I had a lot of problem when I was trying to write the test class. But that situation won't happen with Flow because in Flow, you don't need to write the test class. You just need to enter the debug mode and then you can just run that solution very easily. So under that scenario, it's actually very quick to develop a solution when it comes to Flow compared to Apex. But these are just the benefits, right? These are just an add-on. Like if you don't want these benefits, you can just like ignore them. But what's really the deal breaker is the announcement from Dreamforce 21 is that Workflow and Process Builder will be retired very soon. So going forward, if you want to go into Salesforce automation and you don't want to do coding, Flow will be the only way to go. But this is not to like stress you too much. It's still gonna take maybe a year or two before the tool got like entirely retired. So we still have some time to catch up Flow using our own speed. So right now, it's a really important and a really nice timing to learn Flow. All right, and then we have the next question is, then who can do Flow? Do I have to be a developer to do Flow? I kind of hinted that in the previous slides. I will actually say everyone can and should do Flow. But notice when I say everyone can, I actually mean everybody with some basic Salesforce admin knowledge. The reason is that even though Flow is relatively easy compared to Apex, in a sense, it's still a very complex tool. So you really need to understand your org, your data model. You have to be really clear about all the basic admin knowledge for you to do like a proper Flow. So everyone with basic admin knowledge can do Flow. You don't have to be a developer. But what do I mean by everybody should? And this everybody should include admin and developers. I will explain to you in the next slide. So if we think about the current trend, everything is happening and changing really fast. The world is changing really fast, right? Meaning that a lot of the digital transformation projects, they all need to happen very fast as well. And that also means right now the ecosystem is really favoring the hybrid roles. Meaning that if you're an admin, right now it will be very beneficial and very important for you to know more technical knowledge. And on the other hand, if you're a developer, it's very important for you to strengthen your communication skills with the business stakeholders. You have to make them understand what your solution is about and be able to communicate with business roles. And Flow is actually the perfect platform for you to achieve the goal for both roles because Flow sits exactly in the middle. It's a bit technical, but it's not going to programming. So for admin, the business roles, and developer, the technical roles, Flow will be the perfect place for you to achieve that hybrid roles. And also, you have several benefits if you learn Flow. So first, for admin, you can have a better control of your org. So imagine if your automation in your org is only built on Apex. It's going to be difficult for you to navigate different classes and what's happening, what happened first, what happened afterwards. Everything is kind of in the black box, right? But imagine if you know Flow. You can then start to understand the automation logic, even for Apex. And then if your automation is built on Flow, you can also navigate your automation without any problem. So in a sense, when you're an admin, you can understand everything that's happening in the back end. And that's a really important thing because and it relates to like your new releases, your new change management. This is a very important factor, right? And then you have a second benefit is if later on you want to go into Apex, it's going to be a lot easier for you. I can guarantee you it's going to be a lot easier. But I will tell you the real reason in the following slides. And lastly, of course, you can have a better recognition. So like I mentioned, Flow focus on logic building. So you only focus on your logical thinking skills and your problem solving skills. So by using flow and be like really good in flow, as an admin, as a business role, you get to share or you get to show like all kind of roles how good your problem solving skills are. And I believe that's actually a deal breaker. It's very important for like non-technical roles to show your mindsets, and flow can provide you that benefit. All right, but then on the other hand, what about developer? The first benefit developers will have is you will be able to manage your technical debt more easily. So I believe that every developer will have their own habit of coding. So imagine if you take over an org that has lasted for example, like 10 years, and then there are dozens of developers who were coding inside that org. It's going to take you a very long time for you to comb through everybody's codes to like really understand everybody's habits, what's happening, how does the things got pieced together, right? But when it comes to flow, because the way you can build it is actually very limited. Like you can use a lot of different logic construction, but the building blocks, it's very limited, meaning that it will be easier for you to comb through all the flows as well. So for developers, it will be a lot easier for you to manage that technical debt. And the second benefit is, of course, you will also have a better recognition. This point, I think, is very important. I always think that it takes another good developer to know how good your codes are. If you show your codes to a business role who doesn't know coding, they won't be able to understand how good you are as a developer. And that's gonna be a bummer, right? You might be a very good developer, but the business or the CEO, the C level executives, they have no way of telling. So by using flow, you can actually use an easier way to demonstrate your programming skills and your problem solving skills. And that's gonna give you a lot of recognition and reputation. So if you're an admin and developers and you want to advance in your career really fast, Flow is actually a very great platform because it lets you to show the skills on the other side of the spectrum. So that's what I think the very important point when it comes to Flow. All right, so that's a short introduction about Flow. And now I hope I kind of convince you of why Flow is important and it makes you feel interested. And now I'm going to go into some like more technical details about flow.
Sorry, I jump a bit. For anyone, if you have questions, feel free to type in the chat box in the Google Meet. Thanks.
Okay, yeah. But and I won't be able to see the chat, so I assume someone can just stop me if there's a question I need to answer right away.
Not for now. Thanks, Melody.
Yeah, okay, great. All right, so for the starter pack, the first thing is the important concepts to learn when it comes to flow. So notice that there's a lot of things that we need to learn when it comes to flow, but this list is based on my own experience. Like a lot of people reach out to me, right? So based on my observation, I noticed that a lot of people are not aware of this list. They're not aware of what important concept they need to catch up when it comes to flow. So I just do like my own summary and I want to share them with you. But just again, note that there's a lot more things that might be outside of these slides. All right, so if that's clear, let's start from the first point, will be the debug and error handling. You know, I also started with workflow and process builder before. And I know that debug and error handling was not a main focus when we were using those tools. What usually happens is we will just create a workflow, we activate it, and then we test on maybe one or two records. And then if it's working, okay, then it's working. We just like let it go, right? And then if any error message happen, it looks really technical. It's like error ID 12345, and then it was too intimidating. So I was like, okay, this is not our fault. There's something related to the system. So I believe maybe some of you experienced the same as well. But we didn't pay that much focus to those errors because workflow and process builder is very limited, right? Meaning that it's very unlikely you will make some big mistakes. But please remember that when it comes to flow, it's very likely for you to make mistakes. And then it's also very likely for you to make big mistakes. So it will be your responsibility to make sure that your solution is running smoothly without any problem. So that also means when we are designing a solution, it's our responsibility to debug. It's our responsibility to handle some custom errors, and then it is also our responsibility to understand the error message. So the error message used to be very intimidating, but now we have to understand everything. So that's a very important point. But luckily, Flow provides what I mentioned, the debug mode, right? So it lets you to debug the flow a lot easier. And we can also use the flow connector to create some custom arrow, so the arrow will be a bit less intimidating. So that's just the benefits. But just know that whenever you have an error message again, don't ignore it anymore. Try to understand it and try to learn what it's saying. So that's the first point. And then the next point, we have variable and collection. So variable, again, it's also something we didn't focus when it comes to workflow and process builder. But that doesn't mean that they don't exist. They're just not explicitly there. But when it comes to flow, variable and collection become a key factor. They're actually the main factor to make your solution flexible and dynamic. So variable and collection is something that we have to catch up as well. But just to give you a brief idea, variable is basically just a placeholder of an unknown value. And a collection, just think about it as a list of variables. So I will call it a variable of variables because it's basically just like a container that's storing a lot of different variables. But that's very important to understand. How do we create and manage variable and collection in Flow? Sorry. All right. And the third thing is loop. So loop is also like a general programming concept. So I actually want to talk about the general loop that we talk about when it comes to programming and the loop element in Flow. So starting from the general loop. General loop, it's actually in every programming 101 courses. So it's a very important yet kind of simple concept, I would say. But the loop in general is used for either unpacking a collection or to repeat action several times. So that's the general loop does. And the loop element in Flow is only used for unpacking a collection. So loop is something that we use a lot. So it's also something that you have to really understand what it is and how it works. And then we have the next point is before and after save trigger. And if you just started with Flow in this release, they have changed the name already. Now it's called something fast view update or related list and action. I will never be able to remember the names. But if you started with Flow in the previous release, it was called before and after save trigger. So these are just two different triggering events. And it's something related to the order of execution. And it's really important to understand how these two triggering events will impact your org and under what scenario should you choose which one. So that's something a good flow architect have to be very clear about. And of course, it will be a plus for you to study the order of execution as well. It's a very difficult thing to study because there's a lot of things to remember, but it's very important. So when you have extra time, study the order of execution. All right. The next point is SLQO and DMO. I find it a bit interesting because when we were doing workflow and PB, I have never seen this before. Like we are not expected to know what they are and then what they do. At least I just really never saw it before. And what's funny is when we switched to Flow, suddenly we were just expected to know what they are. There's no easy documentation, no explanation of what they are. It's just there and you just have to understand. So that's one thing that I struggle a lot in the beginning. But to put it easily, SOQO and DMO, they're basically just two different languages that handle different operations. So SOQO handles the read operation, for example, like getting only just like getting records from your database. And the DML handles the write operations. And that's, for example, creating records, updating records, or deleting records, all use DML. So what we need to learn here is to understand which element will call for these operations. So like I said, get records element, use one SOQL query. Create, use one DMO statement. And then some, for example, like update records, if you specify the condition, sometimes it will use one SOQL and one DML together. And we have to know like every scenario and then what's happening in the backend. But why is that important? It's related to the next point, which is the governance limits. So the Apex governance limits also apply to flow. So then in one transaction, you have some limitation like how many SOQL query you can have, how many DML statements you can have, how many SOQL rows you can have, all that kind of limits. And if you want to become a really good flow architect, you have to know those limits by heart, because it's very easy to like hit those limits if you don't know what they are and if you don't know what you're doing. So governance limits is something that's very important to flow, but yet it's a lot more technical. So you might need to spend some time picking up on what governance limits is. And besides from the governance limits, we also have the flow general limits. And that's something like, for example, how many elements you can have in one flow interview, things like that. But personally, I would say it is harder to hit the general limits compared to the governance limits. So try to study the governance limits first and then the general limits afterwards. But you have to know both for sure. All right. And then the next point is what we call the running context. Again, something not a focus for workflow and PB, but yet when it comes to flow, you have to know all the possibilities. The reason is that workflow and PB, they only run on system context, meaning that they are just basically running like an admin profile. But in flow, you have a lot of different scenarios. And then based on the trigger, you will also have different contexts. So what is running context really? Running context is basically the setting that just defined which record or which fields the flow can access. So if the flow runs on system context, it means that the flow can access every field, every object, and every records. But from the user context, it means that the user security setting will apply. So for flow, we have three different kind of contexts. We have user context, system context with sharing, and system context without sharing. And that's something very technical. And I'm not going to go into details here, but just take some time to pick up those concepts as well. And another part about running context is based on how the flow is launched, the running context will be different as well. So for example, if you launch a flow from a process builder, the flow will run in the system context. But if you launch the flow from, let's say, maybe like a button, it would run in the user context. So there's like different possibility that we have to study. And that's a very important part when it comes to the security and data security design. All right. And then the last point is about launching flow. Again, have to compare with workflow and process builder all the time, because workflow and process builder, they only have one way of launching, right? It's only when there's a record change. But when it comes to flow, there's a lot of different triggering ways. We would go through some details when we go to the flow types. But besides from different flow types, you can also launch the flow manually by using, for example, like a button, an action from Apex, a lightning page, things like that. So as a good flow architect, you have to understand all possible ways of launching flow. So that's also a very important thing. So these are just the 8 points that I think are the most essential one that people would kind of ignore in the beginning. So make sure when you have time to make sure you understand every point on the slides. But I would also like to maybe spend a minute looking at this slide. And what you will notice is that everything is relevant to Apex. So that's why I mean if you want to learn Apex, it's easier for you to learn Flow first, because when it comes to Flow, you basically have to start picking up the Apex technical stuff, but you just don't have to go into the coding part. So once you're familiar, or once you become an expert in Flow, you will know all the Apex relevant technical limitation, or like you will know all the technical stuff. And then when you're ready to go into Apex, you just need to pick up the coding part. So again, if you want to start with Apex, you can start with Flow and then do Apex afterwards. All right, and then the next slides, we are going to talk about different flow types, because different flow types basically define how the flow is triggered. So that this corresponds to the last point of our previous slide. So I put them into two categories. The first one is can have user input, and the second one is cannot have user input at all. So start with can have user input, we have screen flow. But notice why I mean can here is because you don't necessarily have to have user input. So in a screen flow, you don't have to use a screen element, and it's totally fine. So that's why I say can, because it's not you have to do it. So there we have screen flow, my favorite type of flow. I think it's just like a really nice product. And on the right-hand side, the flow without user input. The first one we have the famous record trigger flow. This is the one that we're most familiar with, because workflow, process builder, or Apex trigger, they're all record trigger. They're all the same type. They run when there's some record changes. And the second one, we have the schedule trigger flow. And this one, the flow will run on the specific schedule that you put or you specify in the flow. So it's running, for example, like daily, weekly, things like that, based on the schedule that you've given. And I would like to say this is actually very similar to a schedulable, batchable Apex class, because the schedule trigger and the record trigger flow, the records will actually be batched. But of course, there's some differences. For example, the frequency of the schedule is different, and also the performance will also be different. So just keep in mind, if you're like a developer, try to compare and try to leverage the difference between schedule trigger flow and schedulable, batchable interfaces. And the third one, what we have is the platform event trigger flow. All right, so I have to be honest with you. In the 200 flows I have built, I have never built one single platform event trigger flow. The reason is because the platform event trigger flow, it's only used if you are building an event-driven integration. So if you're not an integration architect, if you're not building integration, it's very unlikely for you to build a platform event trigger flow. So if you are a bit scared and then wondering what it is, don't stress too much. It's only for integration. And then if you don't build integration, you probably won't build this flow either. And lastly, if we don't have any triggers, and if we couldn't have any user input, it will be an auto-launched flow. For auto-launch flow and screen flow, you will have to design some manual triggers. And here, I mean, for example, evoked from a button or an action from some user behaviors. So for screen flow, auto launch flow, you have to create those manual triggers. Otherwise, those flow will never be run, even if you activate them. All right, so that's it about different flow types and some details of flow. The next thing we want to do is to build a demo flow together. So let me just let me introduce our use case today after some water. So the business use case today, I really like it. If you're familiar with Opportunity, you might know that there is a button called Clone with Related, and that allows us to clone the opportunity with some related list. But there are a lot of limitations. First, we couldn't clone custom related lists. Second, we couldn't use that button on some custom objects, right? So that's a bummer because I really like that feature. But luckily, we can actually build that using Flow. So our business use case today is we're going to design a button that let us clone a custom object with its related list. So that's the use case. And at the same time, I also think it's a really good case for learning purposes because we're going to go through many different concepts that we just covered in the previous slides. So if that's all good, I'm going to close my slide and then jump into my Salesforce interface. All right, so this is my Salesforce interface. And before we start with flow, I want to kind of tell you my data structure. So I have two custom objects. The first one is called projects, where it tracks all the projects that I have to do. And then inside projects, I have a related list called requirements, which is the actual task that I have to do for each project. So our goal today is to build a button here that let me clone the project together with the requirements. All right, so let's go into the setup and then open our flow builder. New flow. So because I want to put it as an action, I will have to use ScreenFlow because only ScreenFlow will support the action. So today we're going to build a ScreenFlow. And I always tend to use freeform, but if you're just starting, you can use the auto layout as well. It's easier for you to arrange things. All right. The first thing we need to do is, because we want to clone the current project, right? We want to clone the project where I click the button. So the first thing is we need to tell the flow which project that is. To do so, we have to create a variable called record ID. It has to be exactly named like this. It's case sensitive. It's exactly like this. All right, and the data type will be record. And then it's the project object. And then because when the flow is starting, I have to mark this variable as available for input. So then the system can kind of feed the project into my flow. So record variable, a very powerful variable that you will use a lot. So try to know what this is and then practice with it. All right. So once we have the record ID, whenever the flow is launched, the system will just fetch the current project. So now we have the information about the current project. All right, but I may want to change the name of the project, right? So I will just use a screen and I will call it change name. And what you can do here is, of course, you can use the standard components. But what I really like is the fields feature. That's still in beta, but I think it's super, super great. So here we can just specify the record variable. So I will use my project, and then all the fields that you can modify will show up here. So I just need to drag this field onto the screen. So whenever the flow is launched, this field will just be auto-populated with my current project. And if the user changed this field, the value will be stored automatically as well. So it actually saves you a lot of time to configure everything. All right, so I want to let people change the name. And the second thing I want to do is I actually want to customize my footer. So instead of showing finish, I want to show a label, say clone project with requirements. Right. So I think that's provides a better user experience. And I'll click done. So what I need to do next is I now have the project. Then I need to have the list of the requirements. For that, I will use a get record element. And I will say get all requirements. And the object will be requirements. And the condition is they all have to belong to the same project. So the project has to equal the record that triggered this flow. And I want to get all the records because I want to clone all the requirements. So once I click done, there will be a collection being created from this get records element. All right, so now I have the project. I have the requirements. I can start with the cloning. The first thing to clone is the project, right? So for that, I would just use a create records, and I would just clone it clone project. And I only want to create one record, and I will use the values from our record variable because I'm cloning it. So of course, it's using the same values. But notice there's a disclaimer here to tell you that make sure the ID is blank before you clone it. So just to be honest with you, I have never experienced any issue when I didn't clean up the ID. But I think the disclaimer is here for a reason. So let's still try to clean up the ID. So we save this first. And before we use that record ID or record variable to clone our project, we need to clean up the ID. So for that, we use an assignment. And then we say clean up project ID. So for the record variable, the ID, I want to clean it up into an empty string. So we clean up the ID here, and then we can connect them. All right. So here, I would like to take some moment to go through what happened to the record ID variable here. So when we start with the flow, the record ID will be, well, it will store the project of where we launched the flow, right? So the ID, the project name, everything will be stored into that record ID. And that's why we can also use that record ID to fetch the requirements. And then when it comes to the assignment, because we clean up the ID field, so right now this record variable will still have the same values as our original project, but only the ID field is empty. So the ID field got cleaned up. And what happened after we go through this create record element? So if we use a record variable to create a record, the newly created ID will be populated back to this variable. So after this element, our record ID variable will actually have the new project ID. And that's something it's not written anywhere. It's just something by design. But it's something that's really powerful to know because first, if you want to use the ID of the newly created record, you can just use the same record variable. And if you want to save the old ID, then the old project ID, you will have to create additional variable and then store that using an assignment before we clean it up and before we create the records. So this is what I mean that when it comes to flow, we really have to be good at handling the variables. We have to know what happened in the backend, what happened in each step, so that we can always make sure we got the correct value that we need. So this is just a reminder for you. All right, so after we clone the projects, the next thing to do is to clone all the requirements. So as I mentioned, requirements is a collection. So to unpack the collection, we will have to use a loop. So we say unpack. I'm just going to call it unpack. And the things to unpack is our requirements. So why do we need to unpack the requirements? It's because right now, all the requirements, they're still linked to the original project. But what we need to do is we want to link them to the new projects. So for each requirement, we will have to update them. And then we will store them into a new collection. And at the end, update them all at once. So first thing to do is to update requirements. And there's a variable we can use is the current item. This will just give you the current requirement that we are unpacking. So for the current requirement, the project will have to be the new project ID. And as I mentioned, that will be stored in the record ID variable. So now for each requirement, we are updating the parent to the new project. So then we would just click save. And then we have to add the updated requirements to a new collection, right? So for that, we will need to use an additional assignment. And then, of course, we will need a new collection as well. So I will create a new variable called requirements to create. The data type will be record. Because it's a collection, we have to check this box. And I want to store the requirement object. So that is our new collection. So for the new collection, I want to add the current requirements that I have updated. All right, so this is the second assignment. And then after I update the requirement, add that to the new collection, I will go on to the next requirement. So to do so, I just need to drag this assignment back to the loop element. And some people might ask, why do we need to use two assignments? It's because based on my experience, if you put these two lines together, it's not guaranteed that this one will happen first. I think it's something related to like the real-time reaction thing. So if you put them together, you will have the first requirement that has a mistake. So when you're doing loop, make sure you always use two assignments, one for updating the current item, the second one for adding them to the new collection. This is actually a very standard loop will look like when it comes to flow. All right, so what this loop will do is, okay, I unpack all the requirements, I update each one, add a new one, and I continue to the next one. And I just keep running and running and running until I finish all of them. Then I can go ahead and then clone my requirements. So I will use a new create records, call it clone requirements. And I will create multiple. And here I will use the requirements to create collection. But also notice here is telling me to make sure the ID is blank. So what I will do is I will go back to the update assignment and I will say the current item, the current ID of the requirements. I will clean that up as well. So when you are doing this, it's not only the ID that you might need to clean up. Whenever you have any fields that you don't want to clone, you will do the same here as well. So for example, I don't know, maybe you have some custom fields that you don't want to clone, you will just clean them up in the same assignment. And that's the same for project as well. If you have any fields from the project record that you don't want to clone, clean them up in the same assignment. All right, so then I can just go ahead and then connect this one. And that's in my flow. I finished cloning the project and I finished cloning the requirements. So now I will just save my flow with related demo. And I make sure there's no arrows, and I can first try to debug. So here is the debug mode of flow. It's very easy to use, and everything is like well put, very easy to understand for beginners as well. And then when we are testing, we have to kind of assign which record we want to test on, right? So I will just test on my projects, and then I click run. And I want to change the name to test project 1. And I will clone project with requirements. And now you can see everything is done. And we take a moment to look at the debug details to the right. If you're just starting with flow, it looks very intimidating. But I can reassure you, this is not difficult to understand. Everything is actually written in a human language. For example, it's telling you the step on it's a screen, you have a text box, and then what did you do? And then you come to the get records element, what happened here, and then what's the results. So here, the debug details, you can find out what happened exactly in each step. And they're actually very easy to understand. So whenever you're doing the debug, it's better for you to make sure all the steps are running as you designed. So very important to understand the debug details here. All right, so the debug or the flow seems to run properly in the debug mode. So what I would do is now I will activate this flow. And like I said, because I want to create it as an action, I would go back to my object manager, find the project, and I will create a new action. And then action type, I choose flow, and you just need to choose the flow that we just created. that will be clone with related demo new. And you can only find the flow here when it's activated. All right, so clone project with requirements. That's our label. All right, and then I will go back to project, and I want to put it on my page layout. Clone project with related. All right, everything should be done now. So let's go back to our projects and then do a hard reload. And now our button is showing up. So let's test again in the actual environment to see if it's working properly. So I want to code as project. All right, so let's go back to our project related list. And then you can see both projects were created. One is from our debug mode. And then it has all the requirements. And then the other one is from the actual interface. It also has all the requirements and also the other field information. So this is just a very easy flow, but that helps us achieve something that's really, really cool. So I really like this example. And of course, why stop here, right? Because you might notice something that's not right. For example, when we finish cloning, it was staying in the original interface. So what is a good practice is we can also create some like user-friendly screens. For example, let me show you the screen I built before. Then we can add some custom message saying that, okay, now your record has been cloned. And you can also add some relative URL. For example, like this, you can just redirect your users to the new project created. So let me show you how it works. So I debug again, and I will call it test project 3. On the product, and when it's successful, I can show up the screen to the user saying that, hey, your record has been cloned, and this is the link. And when the user click on it, they will just be redirected to the newly created record. So there's a lot of things you can do to kind of improve the user experience. And then you can also add like a custom arrow screen and use the full connector to show a custom arrow message. For example, if anything happened, I will show my user saying that, hey, there's an error when you try to create the records. So in a sense, the user won't feel like the flow is faulty. Even if there's an error, they can feel that everything is by design, everything is being controlled. So that is just a quick demo of an easy flow.
Melody, we have a question.
Yes, of course.
Questions.
Yes.
Okay. So what is the difference between update record and assignment?
So why do I first use assignment?
And update record.
Update records. Okay. All right. So I'm gonna go really technical. Okay, I'm just gonna show the screen, even though it's a bit funny. So this is something that's very technical. So actually, I can show you right now. So if I drag and update records, you can see there are actually for screen flow, there's actually 2 different options. For record trigger flow, you have 3 options. So the first one is you use an ID from the record variable, right? And then if you assign a variable, usually that has already exist in your flow already. So when you use this option, when you run this flow, you actually only use one DMO statement. But when you use the second option, if you specify the condition, so for example, I say, I want the account, blah, 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 and I want to update the fields. What the system does is first, I try to get that record. So what we say, when you use get record, you use one SOQL query. And then update the records, use DML statement. So when you use the second option, you actually use 2 things, one SOQL query and one DML statement. So the timing that you will use assignment is when you already have that record ID. So for example, in this flow, I have the record variable already, right? So I don't need to get it again using the get records. So what I would do is I would just use the assignment to update my record ID variable, and then I will use and then I will use an update record, and then say I want to update the record ID. So if the variable has already exists in flow, you will use assignment and then update records. But if today you don't have that variable yet, you don't have that record yet, you will if you need to use get record and then update the record, you might as well just use the second option. So this is basically combining get records and update records all together. So if that's clear. Yep. Okay.
I
Great.
think we have another question.
Yes. Oh, actually, I can just maybe I can read it.
Yeah, just
Can?
posted that one. Just wondering if a normal user without development background, can they build something without the understanding of the collection and looping? It's just like a simple workflow, maybe a replacement for the existing workflow since they'll be retired, right?
Yes. Can user do so? I would say yes, because right now there's actually many documentation that tells you how you can use a loop. And so you can basically just follow those steps to build out the solution. But it will be still the best for you to try to understand the loop and collection afterwards, so then you can know what's the impact of what you're building right now. Because okay, I'm just gonna tell you my own story. So I started the blog 1 year after I built with Flow, right? And at that moment, I was feeling kind of confident about my Flow building skills. And the first Flow that I published, it has a loop, and I used an update records inside the loop. So just the same day, there were people reaching out saying that, hey, you shouldn't do it because you're gonna reach the governance limits really quick. So I did the mistake even after 1 year starting with Flow. So it is okay for you to use loop and collection if you don't have the full knowledge, but it's gonna be a bit risky. So if you have time, just still try to understand what they are, because essentially they are not that complicated. Yes.
All right. Yep. Thank you, Melody.
Yep.
As a best practice, how many flows we should create on one object? Okay, so very good question, because it's like the all-time best debating question. So people will always say it's the same for Apex trigger. You should only have like one trigger per object, and that would be the same for flow as well. You try to have one record trigger flow per object. But the thing is, you couldn't actually combine the create update flow together with the delete flow. So some people will say maybe you have two flow, one for create and update and one for deletion. So two flows per object. That's the best practice. But okay, since we're here, I am just gonna share with you that there's a lot of scenarios that you might need to create an additional flow for that object. That's okay. It should be acceptable as long as you're really clear what's the running condition. So if you have two flows that run on the same condition, that is not okay, because you couldn't control which flow runs first. You couldn't control the impact and the interaction between those two flows. But if today you have to have a very tiny flow and you're super strict on controlling the start condition, and that will be acceptable. So I hope that answered the question. In general, two flows per object, but it's okay if you want to have more.
Sorry, Melody. But the
Yes.
things like in Flow, right, we can have the screen, right? It's
Yeah.
different with this just triggers. But what do you think that if I have like a lot of forms, a lot of screen, is it okay to have many flow
If we have a lot of what?
form, like screen flow?
If we have a lot of screen flow, it is okay to have many screen flows, because like I said, you can only trigger screen flow manually.
Right.
So yeah, it's never gonna happen that like many screen flow will run together and interact each other. because the
Right.
user have to click the start flow in a sense. So it's okay to have mini screen flow.
So if I can answer Saifuddin questions, like because the flow is very widely used, it's kind of different with just a triggers, which is like just the back end running. So because flow have a screen flow, so it doesn't mean that only one or two flow active based on the how many screen we have as well. Can I say
Yeah,
that?
yeah, that's true. So if we make it more concise, the 1-2 flow per object, that's specifically for the record trigger flow.
Right.
And then if it's screen flow, it's like in addition. We shouldn't like think about how many flows we can have. I don't think there should be any limitation on that. But really good point, Johan. Yes. All right. And next question, Andy, is there a limit of max number of running flows concurrently? This is, I am actually not aware of that, to be honest. I think there might, but I think it's more related to like how many API calls you can have, things like that. I can do a little bit of research on that. But again, because about the running flows, because we say the best practice is to have 1 or 2 flow per project, or 1 or 2 record trigger flow per object, right? If you have any, right now subflow is not possible, but anyway, if you have any subflow, for example, they will be like kind of grouped into one transaction. So I think if you shouldn't be worried about the concurrent flows, if you control your flow structure really well, you should more worried about how you can control that structure, if that kind of makes sense. All right, and next question. If I have 2 flows working on an object creation, how does the system determine which one to? Can you? Yeah, so like Johan say, try to combine them into one. And to answer your question, Teklon, we couldn't control it. The system couldn't control which flow to run first. It's actually something that many developers are complaining about. So no, we couldn't control. So always try to make sure if they have the same condition, try to combine them into the same flow. All right. So, more questions? I have requirement where I want to update some of the fields on the SIM record, and we have other requirements when you send an email after the okay, so that's can I come back to that question afterwards? Maybe we can also talk about it afterwards, because it seems like it's like a yeah. All right, so that's it, the demo of the simple flow. Now I want to show you some complex flow as well. Sorry, let me just keep it there. So we're not going to demo how to build them, but flow can really work on some complex solutions. For example, the same flow that we built, we can extend it to clone multiple related lists based on the user input. And that's possible. And the second example is to create custom rollup summary. And we can also do that with flow, but we have to use 2 different flows. And the third one is if you have a list of records and you want to give them an auto number, but that auto number, we want the flexibility to reorder them. And it's also possible with flow. So just like many, many different use cases. But just like you see here, these are kind of complex business case. But in a sense, the flow doesn't look complicated. And in fact, I have never built a flow that's super complicated. Most of the flow for complex solutions, I can finish it within maybe step of 15. I never go more than step 20. So I think, but I want to show you this graph. This is the most complicated flow I found online. It looks like impossible to understand for like for people outside. But what I want to really mention is I really don't think you need a complex flow to solve a complex solution. Rather, what we should focus on is to find a smart solution. A lot of people will build flow like based on their own like current mood. They would just think, okay, I need to update. Okay, I need an assignment, blah, 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 and then just put it on the canvas. But that's not the best way for you to manage your flow. So when you're designing a solution, always try to think if you can consolidate them into like a simple and smart solution. So again, complex solution or smart solution is more important than complex solutions. So this is just what I want to mention with this graph. All right, so I have finished praising flow. I've said so many nice things about flow. But what's really important is we also have to be really critical when it comes to flow. There are some things that flow cannot do, and only Apex can. And as a good architect, we have to understand them as well. So I'm showing you some examples. The first one is if you want some complex screen interaction, you couldn't do that with flow. So what I mean actually is when it comes to screen flow, you only have that standard screen components, right? Sometimes they have their limitations, and sometimes it's really not flexible. And of course, you can install some custom components, but then again, there will be some security concern, right? Because you don't really know what's happening in the back end. So if you want really complex solutions, a really complex interaction, you might have to go with Lightning Web Component or Visualforce page. Flow will have its limitation when it comes to screens. And the second one is the partial, what we call the partial DML operations. Imagine if you're in Flow, you're updating a whole list of records. If there's one error for one of the records, your whole operation will fail. But in Apex, you can kind of tweak it. You can say, I still want to update the records that don't have errors, and then just ignore those that failed. It's possible in Apex, but not possible in Flow. And the third thing is Flow is not designed to handle large amount of data. This is actually the official statement from Salesforce. So if you are handling like really big amount of data, maybe like a couple hundred of thousands in a very high frequency, let's say every day, go with Apex instead. And lastly is, of course, some custom web services. If you want to have custom REST service or SOAP service, you couldn't do that with Flow. It just doesn't support it yet. So if you're building some complex integration, you will have to go with Apex. And this is just to name a few. During your own learning process, it's very important to keep asking yourself, should I use Flow or should I use Apex? Can I achieve this with Flow, or do I have to go to the next level? It's a very important question to keep in mind constantly.
So Melody, looks like from based on what you mentioned on the limitations, workflow and process builder should be okay to migrate to Flow. Am I right to say that? Say that?
Sorry, you mean what?
Workflow and process builder
Mhm.
should be fine to move to Flow.
Yes. So right now, they have I can try to find that list, but Salesforce, before they have like a quick document saying that what is supported in each automation tool. And they were also setting the timeline of when Flow will support them. So very important thing with workflow is the outbound message, right? But now it's supported in Flow. And for process builder, I don't think there's anything that's not supported anymore. So it's very safe to say right now Flow supports everything that workflow and process builder can do.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. All right. The last point of today is just my personal advice of how to advance in Flow. And I just learned that from my own experience and also the collaboration with the community. And the first point would be actually start with screen flow. Many people would think record trigger flow is closer to workflow and process builder. So maybe I should start there. But my personal view is that when it comes to record trigger flow, and it's hard for you to understand what exactly happened in the back end because you couldn't visualize it. Also, when you're debugging, you always have to run in the rollback mode, meaning that it wouldn't have any impact to your actual interface. So the benefit of starting with ScreenFlow is if at any point you want to see what happened to your variables, at any point you want to see what your collection looks like and then how your formula looks like. If anything is like designed properly, you can easily drag like a test screen on the canvas and then just use that test screen as part of the debugging process. And so you can really visualize and conceptualize your flow a lot quicker if you use a ScreenFlow. And it's not going to be difficult for you to convert ScreenFlow into a record trigger flow afterwards either. So if you're just starting, try experimenting with ScreenFlow, and then try to see all the variables and all the backend details as much as possible. The second thing is make sure you test a lot. I know, because I also started with workflow and PB, right? I know the testing process is like, we go to the interface, we test maybe 2-3 records, and if it works, okay, my flow is or my automation is perfect. But with flow, a lot of anticipated things can happen. I once saw a flow and they have a post element for 2 months after, and they only tested the first part of the flow. So they just started that flow, and then a lot of records entered that flow, and after 2 months they realized the flow wasn't working as they expected. And then you see it's very messy to clean up this kind of situation. So when it comes to flow, test as much as possible until you're 100% confident that this is running correctly. The third point is, many people will ask, is there a standard way of building flow? Is there a best way of building flow? My experience, I don't think there's only one way to solve one problem. Many people will think differently, and then we all have our own creativity, right? So there's many ways for you to design a solution that will work on the same problem. But there are some things that you should never have done, or you should never do inside your flow. For example, the example that I mentioned, don't put a DML statement inside a loop. There's something that you should never do. So instead of trying to find the best solution, try to identify what you cannot do in flow. And the rest, just let your imagination fly. Like, experiment with your solution. It's gonna help you. And the next one is, just like other Salesforce products, we can study the documentation, of course, but you can only progress when you start really using it. And that's especially true when it comes to automation. So if you have time, practice with many cases, and you can find a lot of different cases online, I believe. Next point, review your flows. Flow learning journey is a very long path. So at the later stage of your journey, you're gonna find you build flow very differently compared to the beginning. So a good way of growing is that periodically go back to your old flows to check if you build the flow properly, efficiently. Try to identify your mistakes from your past, and that's gonna help you learn really quick going forward as well. And then finally, I would say, I have mentioned this several times, flow focus on your logical thinking and your problem solving skills. So in your daily life, try to train your logical thinking skills as well. And you can do that by many different things. For example, playing Sudoku, playing different puzzles. Try to train how you solve a problem, and that's gonna help you to advance in flow as well. So that's just my personal tips of how to advance in flow efficiently. And at the end, oh, sorry, shameless plug. I believe that it's better to have community together with you, to work with flow with you. And then if you have any questions, it's always the best to kind of post it to the community, and then you can learn from each other, right? So the shameless plug here is our Salesforce Flows and blog actually provide the free consultation. If you have any questions, you can just send me an email. If we have time, we will try our best to help. So just for your information, if you need to learn flow together, just don't be shy to reach out. And lastly is, I compile a list of good resources that I use very often. But I believe you might know all of them already. So this is just to give you a quick overview of the blogs that I visit a lot, and I hope they will help you too. All right, and then before we jump into the QA, I just want to say thank you for today. Thank you for your time. And again, if you want to reach out, if you want to discuss something, or if you just want to stay connected, this is my contact information, and then just feel free to connect and reach out. Thank you for today.
Okay, thanks a lot, Melody. Yeah, I think I see the message in the chat box that this is one of the best flow demo so far with the
Thank you so
demo.
much. Thank you. Yeah, I was really trying, because I don't like developers to teach flow. I appreciate that, but I think when it's developer, they will understand developers' mindsets, but it's hard for them to understand people who don't code. So my goal is actually really trying to make everything easily understandable, even for people that don't have computer or computing background.
Lisa, I think we will post the slide in the Salesforce Singapore user groups.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and thank you so much for the nice comments. And for Safe, if I pronounce it correctly, Safe, I think your problem when it comes to flow, I think we can reconnect that after the session. So if you can just maybe send me a message and then we can discuss that afterwards. And there's also another problem or question. What will happen to existing workflow? What will happen to existing workflow and PB after 2023? Okay, the news or the information I saw is they will stop people from creating new workflow. But I think it's going to take them a while for them to kind of cancel everything. But I think we just have to be a bit patient on that because I think they're giving new information in the next release.
I think also I heard Anna that Salesforce may introduce a converter to convert
Yeah.
your workflow and process builder to flow.
Yes.
That's what I read as well. Yep. I think that's all for these sessions. Manish, you want to continue?
Yeah, so we'll have the quiz now. I think I'll share my screen. So the rules are simple. Let me share. You just need your mobile phone so you can scan and open up. Let me share. Can you see my screen? So you just need to open this slido.com or you can scan this QR code and enter this number 278784. Okay, so you'll have multiple choice questions.
So maybe Manish, we can share that the winners, what will they get?
Yeah. So we'll give away certification vouchers, 6 certification vouchers. So the top 6 winners will get that, and also few swag. If you are based in Singapore, you will get few swag as well. Yeah, for the top 2 maybe. So I think we'll have 12 questions. I think 6 questions will be based on the today's topic, that is flows. Then you'll also have few other general Salesforce questions. You'll have 20 seconds to answer each question. So get your fingers ready. And only one answer is right for each question. So, and also the winner would be based on how fast and how fast you answer along with the correct answer. Again, we also check for who is the fastest. Are you able to join this already? Should I activate? Is it?
Hi Manish, I can just see the screen UG Meetup December with Q&A. Is that correct? Is the correct one? No.
No.
Okay, let me try that.
Maybe can you open slido.com?
Yeah, enter the 278784.
Let me try also. So yeah, so
78784. Yes.
yeah,
I'm
278
here, but
784.
no.
Manish, do you need to
Activate.
Maybe.
Yeah, you need to start the.
Okay, now you can join.
Yeah.
Now you have to enter your name and join. Click join. Yeah, so now I can see people join. Desmond, Anna, Apit, Fanindra, Jason, Desmond. We have 18 so far joined. 19, 20.
Yeah, as Manish mentioned, we have 6 vouchers for Salesforce certifications, and we also have quite a few Salesforce, right? But only can give to those of you based in Singapore because of the logistic and shipping.
Mm.
Yeah.
23. How many are we in the session? 26. So waiting for 3 more. I think Jason, you didn't join. Joan, you didn't, right? Maybe.
I joined already.
Yeah.
I think there's some duplicate, like
Okay, okay.
YY. There's some duplicate, so we can
Okay.
I think we can start.
So I'll start.
Yeah.
Okay. So the first, so you'll on your screen you can see your questions and also the options. Yeah, and you can see it here as well. First question: which of these announcements at Dreamforce is correct about flows? You have 4 options. 15 seconds to go. Process Builder will retire, or will it be costly? Apex will retire, or Apex will have additional costs. 2 seconds. And the answer is workflow process will be retired. That is a correct answer. I think
100% correct.
yeah. And the fastest is Harsh Vaishnav, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're still leading 5 seconds. Okay, we'll go to the next question quickly. Which one is correct regarding the systematic limitations of flow? Flow does not have any limits. It has less limits. Governor limits apply to flow, or governor limits does not apply to flow. Three, two, one. Okay, the answers are split here, 5, 25, and 70%. The right answer is option C. Governor limits will apply to flow. And Harsh is still leading. Arpit has joined in number 2. Arun, Ankush, BH, number top 5. I'll go to the next question. How many different types of flows are there? 2, 3, 4, 5. You can recollect the slide that you looked at, what Melody has shared. Time up. Majority said 5, and that is the right answer. Arun Kumar is leading now. Anshul, Ankush, Mahesh, and Sen. Next question. In a record trigger flow, which of these is not available? Create trigger, delete, update, and delete. And done. Wow, 100% answered it correctly. It's undelete. All right. And again, we look at the leaderboard. Next question on screen. Which of these elements will use SQL? Create, get, assignment, or decision? So which needs querying, basically. 3, 2, 1. Right, majority said get records, which is good, is the right answer. Arun is still leading. Anshul, Mahesh, Tech. Which of these elements will use DML statements? Update records, get records, assignment, decision split. I think this is easy to answer. So DML is data manipulation. So to manipulate your data, you need update. So still majority. So I think you've understood the questions, the session today very well, the majority. So now we've done with flow questions. I think it will be more generic questions. So next question. Okay, we look at the leaderboard first. Arun is still leading. Anshul, Mahesh, Tech. What is the current Salesforce release? Winter 21, 22, Spring 21, 22. 3, 2, 1. And
Wow.
this is split.
A
Okay.
lot of people do not know.
So it's winter 22. I think most will say winter 21. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, next. Okay, we look at the leaderboard. Arun is still getting it right. And the others as well. The top 5 got it all right. Next question. What is the biggest Salesforce yearly event called? Sea Dreaming, TeleDX, Dreamforce, or Salesforce Plus?
Sea dreaming.
They should be easy, but yeah, we wanted easy questions, but we also look at who is the fastest. 3, 2, 1. And the answer is
Wow, that's what person said. Still dreaming.
good. Yeah, Dreamforce is the right answer. The leaderboard, still top 5 got all right. Next question.
I will skip the next few questions.
Which of these is a series in Salesforce Plus? It's a series. Astro and Friends, Trailhead Super Badges, Getting Started, or Boss Talks. This is, let's see. Wow, this is super split. So the right answer is Boss Talks. So Salesforce Plus is a streaming service, so you can see a lot of videos in there, and it has series similar to Netflix. I'll say the technical Netflix. You can check it out. So the leaderboard, let's say Desmond.
Wow.
Wow.
Nice.
Wow, you correct 9 of 9.
Yeah. Okay, next question. When was the last Sea Dreaming event conducted? Is it October 21, November 22, November 21, October 22? Southeast Asia Dreaming event. Wow, majority got it right. Good to see that.
There is 2% like 2022.
Yeah, we missed. I think they didn't look at the year. Yeah, but you got the
Too
dates right.
fast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The leaderboard Desmond, Arun, Anshul,
Wow.
Mahesh, Saifuddin has come into top 5 now. Question number 11 coming up.
Last 2 questions.
Which of these is not a Salesforce product? Tableau CRM, Tableau, Twitter, Slack.
Wow.
Very good. That is the right answer. Next question. Final question.
Last questions.
Which of these is not a Salesforce release?
Super easy.
Spring, summer, autumn, winter. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We don't have autumn release. That's right. Congratulations, Desmond, Arun, Anshul, Mahesh, Saifuddin. I think that number 6 also we need. If it shows what your position, number 6 also you can just message us. I don't think we can see. Maybe you can see it in admin. Yeah. But for now, congrats everyone. We'll reach out to you and give
I
you the
Manis, I have one thing. For everyone based in Singapore, feel free to email me. I put my email in the chat box. We have strike for everyone based in Singapore.
yeah.
So all are winners.
Great.
But just for the strike, not for the vouchers.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's on the quiz. I'll
Yeah, that's all I think
end
for
the
today.
quiz.
And anyone have any last questions before we end these sessions? Anshul, you can see in the chat box.
You can email Johan. All the winners, the top 6 winners, you can just email Johan.
Yeah, and everyone in Singapore that attend this session also email to me. We have strike for everyone.
All attendees, you mean, Johan?
All attendees.
Oh, great.
But
So
only in
all
Singapore.
attendees in Singapore also reach out. You can collect your swag.
Okay, anything else? Jason?
No. So yeah, it's the end of the year. So happy holidays, everyone.
Thanks a lot, Melody,
Yeah.
for sharing the flow.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
No problem. Thank you. Happy holidays.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.